Indiana Jones. Who is Indiana Jones, and why does he still capture our imaginations to this day? Well, with Indiana Jones and the Great Circle out now, we thought this is a perfect time to explore the legend of Indiana Jones. In this two-part series, Luke Lewis joins me as we break down what makes Indy iconic. Today, we'll be diving into the films, their impact, our favorite moments, and why they still hold up today. In part 2, we'll explore the books and the games. So, grab your fedora and your whip, and let's get started. This episode of the Gamerheads podcast is brought to you by Seven Bridges Premium Gourmet Yum Yum Sauce. Enhance every bite with our savory blends of flavors, perfect for meats, vegetables, and crispy treats. Whether you're dipping, drizzling, marinating, grilling, roasting, or snacking, Seven Bridges Yum Yum Sauce takes your culinary experience to the next level. Get yours today and make every meal a gourmet delight.
Hi, I'm Celia Schilling from Yacht Club Games.
Hey, this is James from Mega Cat Studios.
Hey folks, this is Matt, aka Stormageddon from Reignite and the Fun and Games podcast.
This is Stephanie from the Boss Rush podcast and the Boss Rush Network.
Hey, this is Mark and Keon from Bunte Avond.
Hey, this is Sebastian with the ProNerdReport.com and the Single Player Experience podcast.
Hi, this is Chris.
Mike.
And Garrett from Daylight Basement Studio.
Hey, this is Baron J67 from Level 1 Gaming.
Hi, I'm Jacob McCourt from the Left Behind Game Club, Crossplay Conversations, and Video Game Trivia.
Hey, this is Todd Mitchell from Code Right Play.
Salutations, this is Mike Carroll from Stroll Art.
Hey, this is Jeff Moonen from Fun and Games Podcast.
What's good, y'all? This is Adam from Respawn Aimfire.
Hey, this is Patrick from the Backlog Odyssey.
Hey, this is Rune from Runic Codes.
Hi, this is Andrew from Spalato Bros.
Hi everyone, Jill Grote here from the Indie Informer.
Hello, this is the Crypt Master, and you're listening to Roger you're listening to Roger on the Gamerheads podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Gamerheads podcast. My name is Roger. Along with me this week, I have a very special guest. I have a good friend of mine, Luke Lewis. He is the host of Lukewarm Games and also Cross-Play Conversations. Luke, thank you so much for joining.
Hello. How's it going, Roger? Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're going to be talking all things Indiana Jones.
Love it.
You and I were talking, I think you reached out to me first and said, hey, are you going to be playing Indiana Jones and the Great Circle? And I was like, do I breathe?
Well, I think I had seen a social post you made about studying archaeology. Yes, Am I remembering that correctly? Yeah, your Indiana Jones fandom goes deep, and mine does too. So I was like on the lookout for people to talk about the Great Circle. So when I saw that tweet, I was like, Roger's the guy. Roger's who I've been looking for. You're the lost golden idol of Holy Grail of podcasters. Speaking of which,
I should show you this. I forgot I didn't show you this. So you can't really see it, but I haven't painted it
props.
Yet. Yeah, this is the fertility idol from Indiana Jones and Raiders Lost Ark.
There you go.
3D printed this.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
I need to paint it yet. But yes, so we thought we're going to do a 2-part series, one on the Gamerheads podcast and then one on your show. And this one's going to be strictly just on Indiana Jones movies and books and TV and games and the lore. And then yours is going to be more about the second episode will be on your podcast, and we'll talk more about the Great Circle. But before we get into all that, why don't you tell the good people that listen to our show more about yourself and what you all do?
Sure. So by day, I work in video games PR at Vicarious PR and V Publishing, helping a lot of wonderful indie games get their spotlight and get on folks' radars because the wish lists are crowded these days, but always working on some cool games.
Yeah.
And then in my free time, I host 2 podcasts, like you mentioned, Crossplay Conversations with friends of the show, Joseph Hooper and Jacob McCourt, and then Lukewarm Games, which is the long-running podcast that I've hosted with my fiance, Claire. Both conversational, good vibes. We mainly focus on indies with a sprinkling of AAA content, but love to chat about games, love to celebrate the medium. We do a variety of reviews, previews, developer interviews, all that good stuff. I think if folks enjoy Gamerheads, they'd enjoy our shows as well. I think we bring similar energy, similar enthusiasm, but yeah, I'm super excited to be here. I feel like this is one we've been talking about for a long time, so excited to get together.
Yeah. And I agree. I mean, if you like this show, you would love your shows. Like, I love your shows.
Appreciate that. Oh, thanks so much.
Yeah. So I'm really glad that you're able to join me on this adventure, and we'll dive into Indiana Jones. So a little bit about this episode, I should say. So this is going to be some spoilers. So if you've never seen Indiana Jones, I don't know where you've been.
Congratulations, I guess.
Yes,
like,
I don't
mission
know.
accomplished.
Yeah, like you are really isolated. No, there are people though. Like, even I've listened to podcasts where they're talking about the Great Circle, and they're like, I've never seen any of the Indiana Jones movies. Like, that's one person on the cast.
I was talking to my partner Claire before this, and I think she hasn't seen all of the originals in terms of like sitting down and really watching them. Like, growing up, her brothers had them on in the background, they were on TV, that sort of thing. So she's like, she doesn't have like cognizant memories of like the entire trilogy.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is a thing. Not everyone was the super fan, which is okay.
That's fine. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. So this episode is for those that, maybe have seen some of the movies and not all of them, and they're like, well, I like Indiana Jones, but I don't really, I'd like to know more about Indiana Jones. Maybe this is for those that are like, I'm probably never going to see the movies, so just tell me what they're about. I don't really care. So that's what this episode's about. Like, we're going to deep dive into some stuff. So if you are planning to ever watch the movies, like, you probably want to stop now, and because I'm going to spoil everything. So
yeah.
But so we're going to go into a lot of stuff on the lore, into the games, into the books, into the TV series and the movies. Before we get into all that, though, I do have a question for you, Luke. What is your first memory of Indiana Jones?
I think it has to be Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first movie. I want to say I was like, I'm going to throw out 6 years old, in that realm, 6 or 7 years old, watching Raiders of the Lost Ark with my folks, and just falling in love with the sense of adventure, and just it's funny, it's dramatic, it's thrilling, it's kind of everything you could want in a movie. Yeah, we were talking about it right before we started recording, but I had an Indiana Jones hat. I remember dressing up, like when you're playing in the backyard, like I played Indiana Jones, like that was actively a game in my mind. Yeah, so I think that first movie, but then things branched out to, we had the games, and I vividly remember trip to Disneyland as a kid, where with the Disneyland ride, like that was like a pivotal moment. So
that's
like,
awesome.
I think those are a couple of the like early ones.
That's awesome.
How about
That's
for
really
you?
Cool. For me, it's Raiders too. I was around the same age. So Raiders came out in 81. So I'm going to age myself. So I was about 5 or 6 when that movie came out. But I didn't see it in the theaters. So you're going to be like, oh my gosh, you are old. But we rented.
And then I'll date myself the other way and talk about Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but go ahead.
Exactly. My parents went and rented a VHS player, and the first movie they rented.
I love that. Okay.
Yeah. From Food Mart, which was the grocery store in our hometown. And then they rented, the first movie was Raiders of the Lost Ark. And the opening scene where they're in South America.
I just watched it like 2 nights ago in preparation for the, yeah.
First of all, love the fact it's just South America. Like it's a country, like just South America. Like, where in South America are you? Like where? But the scene
makes it seem so mysterious. Like it's right? It could be anywhere.
Anywhere in South America. In the scene where the guy like pulls out his gun. Mm-hmm. And he pulls out his whip and whips, the gun out of his hand. Right?
Sound.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So my parents,
you're locked in.
They would rewind that in slow motion over and over and over and over, to the point where I'm like, can we just watch this movie? I just want to watch the movie. But they loved like for them, like that's like me with my this is like me with my new car that has all this like screens that I can push all these buttons. I'm like, whoa, what does this button do? Ooh, that heats my seats, right? Like that's how I see my parents with the VHS. Like, watch this.
Well, and the novelty of the special effects at the time, the equivalent movie at their age was not Indiana Jones.
Yeah,
so that's a hell of a first VHS to pick up.
That's true. So that was the very first movie that we rented, and I fell in love with Indiana Jones like instantly. Like he is my favorite character of all time, and we'll get into more about that. But the thing that I will say, the thing that I think I love most about Indiana Jones, and this is a question I'll ask you next, of what you love most about Indiana Jones. The thing I love most about Indiana Jones is that here's this character that is the first time that I remember like a lead character that's flawed, right? He makes mistakes. He's not always right on things. He even says, I'm making this up as go along, right? Like he's not perfect. He is like the opposite of perfect. And then the other thing that I love about him is that he made smart sexy. I mean, up to this point, like being a nerd was, you're a nerd. And here's this guy who like can speak several different languages, opens up the book, like and pages right to the page he needs to go to around different artifacts. And he can talks about the background of different things and the whatever, like I just love him very much. And that's what I love about Indiana Jones. I mean, what attracts you to Indiana Jones? Like what is something that stands up for you for him?
I think it's just kind of that the pacing of it all, of like the moments of levity, the moments where you're on the edge of your seat, the moments where it's action packed. I think to your point about the character Indiana Jones, like I love that he stands for something. Like punching Nazis will never not be something I will root for. And even as a kid, I was just like, this guy's, he's got it right. He's the bad guys, know? And I also love like historical fiction interwoven into things that don't present as like, this is like very like I love history, but I think it presented it in like a fun, digestible way that like obviously it's a work of fiction, but having loose ties to real things and real artifacts and real places. I also love travel, so I think as a kid I found it very cool, this idea that like his job was like teaching, but then he gets to go on these globetrotting adventures and make discoveries and then bring these experiences back to his students and stuff. And it's just such a cool character, such a fun journey, what's not to love to some extent.
I agree. So we're gonna go into the movies next. Before we get into the movies, what's your favorite Indiana Jones movie?
I think it's gotta be The Last Crusade, which I'll put an asterisk on that though, of like I think Raiders is like the best film, if we're gonna be like what is the best like piece of cinema of Indiana Jones. It's definitely Raiders. Kicked it off, excellent, wonderful movie. I like Temple of Doom a lot for it's just like kind of campy, almost horror adjacent stuff, and it gets really weird and it's funky, and Short Round is a great character. King Kwan's awesome. Like, so that's great in and of itself. But I think it's Raiders. I love Sean Connery in that movie. There's so many cool scenes. I think the hunt for the Holy Grail itself was like, I know, like I'm aware of that. I've like know things about that or like the lore of it, and I found that really interesting. And I think that's the one for me. And the scene where they drink out of the Holy Grail and then the Nazi dies and like all this stuff. Like I vividly remember that movie, or even the beginning scene where it starts with the train and he's running after the grave robbers. Like all that stuff is just like I can play it back in my head right now. How about for you?
Yeah, for me the same. It's The Last Crusade.
Really? I feel like that's kind of a rare. Maybe it's not, and I don't talk to a lot of diehard Indiana Jones fans, but it always seems like everybody loves Raiders, like pop culture. That's like the reference known film. But maybe that's just because it's the first one. So it's like if you only watched one, you probably watched that one.
If you watched Raiders, I think Raiders holds a special place in my heart because obviously it's the first movie that I've seen with Indiana Jones, right? But The Last Crusade, what makes that movie so good is that, it's the search for the Holy Grail. And for them, it's their father and son relationship. That's the Holy Grail that they're looking for.
Great chemistry, too, between Harrison Ford and Sean Connery, I feel like.
Oh my goodness. What a great... There's a lot of scenes that were like just ad lib and just
really
kind of,
nice.
Like, and it's just, and they just played off each other so well. And really, I'll just mention this here. Like, Sean Connery was not going to take the part from what I read because he was concerned about like being the father of this iconic hero, right? Like, how can anybody do that? And I don't know if there was another person that could have played the father of Indiana Jones better, because it's just so well done. And he's such a great character. Yeah, it's just he's a lovable character, but also the thing that I really love about The Last Crusade is up to this point, you always see Indiana Jones as kind of like this brash, kind of cocky, right? And he like nobody puts him in his spot except for his dad. And even, 20 years later, his dad is still kind of putting him in his spot, right? And just that relationship, and like, it's such a good film. And we'll talk more about this, but there's elements of that movie that are in Crystal Skull and the Dial of Destiny that if you miss it, you wouldn't. I mean, it's easy to miss, right? But there's moments where he kind of goes back to being his dad. Like, there's moments where he kind of takes on parts of his dad, and it's so good. It's so interesting. So yeah, Last Crusade for me too. So let's start talking about the movies. Let's talk about them in chronological order, because I think that's the right way to do it. Because
that sounds good.
I got the box set for Christmas one year, and
nice.
Temple of Doom is their very first. It's the first volume, so you have to watch that one first. So Temple of Doom takes place in 3 or 34. I don't remember. I think it's 33.
It's before.
It's prior to,
even though it's
Raid
the
of Dawn.
second.
Correct.
Wild.
It's a prequel.
Thought of that. Yeah, it's been Temple of Doom's the one I haven't watched super recently. But...
Okay. Yeah. So it takes place in India. Well, not right away. It actually takes place in China, I believe. Indiana Jones is meeting with Lao She, and he has like an artifact that he's going to trade for a diamond of some sort. They meet in his club, and Willie Scott is an American singer who happens to be...
This is the iconic white tuxedo jacket,
white tuxedo
right?
jacket.
Okay.
Yes. So the opening scene was weird for me, being an Indiana Jones fan. When I'm watching this, I was like, why is he wearing a white tuxedo? Like, what's going on here? What is this?
I had the opposite reaction of like,
really?
I'm going to get married one day and I'm going to wear that tuxedo jacket. That's not currently the plan. I'm getting married this summer. But as a kid, I was like, that's the look.
That's the look I'm going for. Yeah.
That's a good looking jacket right there.
Yeah. And I will say Anything Goes, the song was real. Like, I loved that song even to this day.
Iconic.
Still, and that opening scene is so good with just like the dance and the music and just the photography of like it all. It's so well done. I love that opening scene. And one of the things that we've seen in Indiana Jones and all the Indiana Jones movies, I don't know about Crystal Skull Crystal Skull 2. I'm not sure about Dial of Destiny. No, not probably Dial of Destiny, because it's not by Paramount. Doesn't produce or doesn't publish that one. Produce or publish it? I'm not sure. But there's that Paramount Mountain in all the movies that starts off. And this one is on a big gong thing.
That's right. It's
the big mountain. It's very cool. That's a very cool scene to open up. And anyway, so then Indy gets... I mean, I don't want to spend too much time in it, because it would be here for like 5 hours if we're going to go into every little detail.
I'm going to make a pot of coffee real quick, Roger. Hold that.
So Indy gets poisoned. He finally, Willie happens to have the antidote. He grabs her. They escape from Lao She and his men. He gets on this plane. I think he's Dan Aykroyd, by the way, is in this movie. I don't know if you knew that, but Dan Aykroyd's the one that's like meets with him and says, "Hey, I booked a plane for you." Yep, that's Dan Aykroyd in there.
Wild.
Yeah, right. And I think the club is called the Obi-Wan, which is also very funny.
That is very
George
funny.
Lucas, right? So he gets on this plane. He thinks he's going to go to safety. Turns out the plane is run by Lao She and his men. They jump out of the plane. They release all the fuel. The plane crashes. Indy's like, this can't be hard to fly a plane, but there's no fuel. So they jump out of the plane in this raft. And that scene like sticks out to me because there was a McDonald's commercial that was playing during that time. And it was, "Have you had your break today?" And it's them falling out of the thing. And I think it was to promote the movie and then promote McDonald's, like go to McDonald's, get a Happy Meal and get the Indiana Jones stuff. And then, enjoy the movie and stuff like that. But yeah, so it was them jumping out of the plane in that raft. That was such a great scene. To this day, I think that's one of the coolest scenes. And thinking back to like, I think that was 84, 85, somewhere around there. No, maybe a little bit later. 6, maybe. Still, like the scene and the special effects. That movie was unbelievable for the special effects.
I think it still is one of the most impressive openings of the series. Like, I just rewatched the opening hour or so of Raiders the other night, and it's a great opening. It's iconic for a reason, but like Temple of Doom really kicks it into gear and defies expectations of like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Now we're in a plane, the scale, the budget, you know, it definitely felt like it was like, this is the sequel. We're like, we're amping up the crazy factor, the wild factor.
Yes. A funny note about the movie. So Spielberg actually wanted Marion to be in this movie. Marion was the love interest of Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark. And he thought, well, the next movie obviously is going to involve Marion again. And Lucas is like, no, it's going to be a prequel and it's going to be about Willie Scott. And so that's the direction it went. And Lucas, what I've read, and I just know a lot about Indiana Jones. So some of the stuff I just read a lot about, right? But he really wanted to make like these movies like serials, like radio serials, kind of like when you like listen to the radio shows. And this one, like he had this idea around like being like this mystical kind of thing, right? With being in India and this Temple of Doom, right? Like looking back at it, like that's such a weird name for it, like Temple of Doom. But yeah, so they end up in India, and it turns out they end up in this small village, and this village had a Shankara stone, which are real actually. And the Shankara stone in their village was stolen by the Thuggee, which is this cult, and they're in this like lavish palace, right? And the Thuggee are back. They're like from the 1800s, but they're back. And they ask Indiana Jones to go and save the children and bring back their stone. There's a lot of really funny scenes in this moment. I should also mention too that Indiana Jones has a sidekick, a Short Round.
Iconic.
I love Short Round so much. And so I don't know, like up to this point, do you have any favorite moments, like when they're like getting into the village and they're like finding out what's happening here? Like there's a couple things that I could talk about, but I want to hear what your thoughts are first.
I just love the banter between Indy and Short Round. Like he just always needs somebody to keep it in his place, and I love that it's a kid in this movie. Like I think it's just a fun dynamic, and I think even then Ke Huy Quan is like a really good actor, and it's fun to see him banter, because I feel like Harrison Ford is like such a force. No matter what point in his career, he's just like this larger than life person, whether he wants to be or not. It's just kind of, it's what he exudes. So I think it was really cool to see them banter. And then I think, like you said, the just kind of the mysterious nature of it, I think it's a compelling. I'm a sucker for a story where it's like, I don't know what's going on and I don't know where this is going, and this is getting a little weird. Then I'm like, okay, I'm intrigued. I don't know, like it's not obvious to me where we're going, so I think that's kind of fun here.
Yeah. For me, there's a couple of moments that stand out. One is when they bring out this food and Willie's like, I can't eat this. It's like, and it doesn't look appetizing, right? And Indy says to her, you're insulting them and you're embarrassing me. This is more food than they get in a week. Eat it. And then she's like, oh no, please, you eat it, And he's like, eat it. And they're like, eat, and just, I love that scene so much, because, here you have this, Willie is way different than Marion. Marion can hold her own against Indiana Jones, and I mean, we'll get into this, but that's his love of his life, right? Like Marion's the love of his life. And the reason for that, but she is not afraid to get her hands dirty. Willie, on the other hand, Willie Scott is not. So she's out of her element in this whole thing, right? And it's just kind of it's a lot of funny moments with that throughout the whole movie, which really is fun to watch with Indiana Jones playing off of that, right?
I think this is overall a goofier movie than the rest of the trilogy, like in terms of silly factor. This one, I forget what podcast I was recently listening to, but someone said it was basically a Resident Evil film, and I'm like, you're not entirely wrong with that comment, which is funny.
Yeah. There's one moment that still like stands out, and it doesn't sit well with me, and that's when Indiana Jones says, "Fortune and glory, kid, fortune and glory." up to this point, we know Indiana Jones is like all about like it belongs to a museum. The museum is about preserving history. And all of a sudden, like we get this image of Indiana Jones saying it's fortune and glory, which you're like, well, it's a prequel. Maybe he changed his ways. When we get to Last Crusade, we can talk a little bit more about that. Like, it doesn't really seem in character of him. But that part's still kind of like, I don't know. It doesn't really feel like Indiana Jones to me. Like that line just felt like he was in it for the wrong reasons,
Yeah, it does feel out of character. I agree.
So they on the way to the temple, or to this palace, I should say. And there's a couple funny scenes. The scene where they pull over and they're riding the elephants, and they stop, and they're sitting around a campfire, and they're playing cards, Indy and Short Round, and he calls them out for cheating. You cheat, Dr. Jones, you cheat. I love that. Another famous line, I should say, it was early on when Indy is trying to get the vial of antidote. Short Round says, "No time for love, Dr. Jones." Like, that's a famous line. I love that line so much. But one scene that I really love a lot is they're sitting around the fire, and Willie's asking Indy about the Shankara stones, right? And the elephants keeps hitting her in the head. That was not planned. That just happened.
Really?
Yes.
That's too funny.
And then they played into it where she grabs it and throws it, and it turns out to be the snake. And of course, Indy like freaks out. He's like, I love all that scene, because you see a lot of Willie's like insecurities throughout that whole scene. But then like she gets mad and she doesn't realize she grabs a snake, right? Then you see Indy like freak out about it. It's a lot of real fun parts about that scene. Then they get to the temple, and I'll let you talk a little bit about this first. Like, what were some of the moments where they get to the palace? What are some of the moments that kind of stand out to you when they first get to the palace?
Gosh, it's been a minute for me with this one, so it's hard to recall like specific portions of the movie. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm blanking.
No, that's okay.
Section.
That's all right. So for me, it's that dinner scene and the snake surprise. They cut open the snake, all those little snakes come out.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Chilled monkey brains.
The monkey, yep.
Eyeball soup, right? Like, all those moments are really, really great. There's a scene, then, everything. So the premise is that they get to this temple, or this palace, I should say, and the Maharaja of this palace is basically a kid, and basically says, "Hey, the thuggies are no longer here. They're gone, and we don't want them here." And it's a blight basically in our history. And Indy apologizes for the whole thing. Like, he's asking a lot about the thuggies and stuff like that. And then of course the thuggies attack him. And there's a scene where he's like in this to me, I think, was the first moment that I'm like, oh, this is gonna be a scary movie. He's in his bedroom and he's like getting ready to make his moves on Willie, right? And they basically are trying to hold out for each other, like, oh, she's gonna run to me first, or I'm gonna run to her first. And he's like pacing back and forth, and in the background there's this painting, and the thuggy like steps out from the painting and grabs Harrison Ford and starts to choke him, or Indiana Jones, right? And then he whips him over his back, and Harrison Ford really threw out his back in that scene, like really bad. Yeah. And he's one to jump in and do a lot of the stunts himself. So yeah, he got hurt in that scene. And then this is such a graphic scene, but like he throws the whip, Short Round throws him the whip, he whips him and gets thrown up in the air and gets caught in the fan and hangs it. It's such a graphic scene, and it's a scene that's from like the top down, and you're looking down, and part of me, so I'm 7 when this movie is out, so I'm in first grade when this movie comes out.
Yeah, this is when stuff got scary for us children watching this film. Yeah,
and you're living vicariously through Short Round, because Short Round's my age when I'm watching this movie, and I'm like, my God, what a traumatic thing for this kid, right? And for Indy, like, it's like no big deal, and it's such a weird moment as a kid, because you're like, God, if my dad did that, like I would be having nightmares every night, right? So it's such an interesting thing to think through, like watching it as a kid and really watching it from his perspective. They find out that there's obviously something going on. They find the thuggy. They run into Mola Ram, who is the scariest villain in all of Indiana Jones. Mola Ram, the actor, I'll just say this right away. So the actor actually he was a famous like Indian movie star. And when this movie came out, the Indian government was not happy because it kind of paints the Indian culture in like not a great light. And he kind of got a lot of like flack from the Indian government, like the fact that he did this movie. And I mean, looking back on it, I'm like, yeah, it's not great. It does not paint the Indian culture.
It doesn't hold up well, I think, in terms of cultural representation.
Yeah. I'm gonna try to jump through all this stuff. The scariest moment is obviously the heart being ripped out. What was your first thoughts when you saw that? Like, what was going through your mind?
I think it just was like such a tonal shift from what I knew of Indiana Jones that I was just like, I was scared. I was creeped out.
Me too. Like, that was really scary. The other scary moment is that Indy then is forced to drink the blood of Kali, and he turns crazy. He goes bad. And you would like to think it's the love of Short Round that turns him around. It's the fire that wakes him up from this eternal darkness. But he wakes up, and this is the moment where you see Indy with his shirt being like kind of ripped off, right? He's got a sleeve ripped off, and
this was the movie poster.
Yes, the movie poster
that I had in my bedroom.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
See, I wish I had that poster. My friend, he had a movie poster from Indiana Jones. It was Mola Ram. It was Mola Ram standing there holding his helmet.
That's not what you want.
No. And the thing is, it was behind his door. So when we were going to bed and his mom's like, good night, and she pulled the door closed,
it's like,
Mola Ram staring at me. Yeah. And I was like, But why is Mola Ram here? My friend was just like, don't worry about it. And he like would stare at you, and you just like look at you wherever you went. Like
that kid did it on purpose. He knew what it was doing. Oh yes, Roger, sleep right here.
I know. I was so scared of Mola Ram. Anyway, so Indy, there's a lot of fun scenes. They go through this whole minecart chase. The scene where there's another gruesome scene where he's fighting against a big bruiser of one of the thuggies, and the prince, who happened to have probably drunk the blood of Kali himself, is like using a voodoo doll of Indy and stabbing him with a knife. And Indy's like, I'm watching this as a kid, and I'm like, oh my god, this is awful. And then he gets crushed by the rock crusher, the villain does, which is super gruesome.
This is where Indiana Jones like perfectly aligns itself with eventually becoming video games of like Indy's gonna fight a much bigger version of the same brute looking man.
Yes.
Like it's the boss fight, Dr. Jones.
Yes. You know what's interesting, the actor that was, that big thuggy is the same actor when we get into Raiders of the Lost Ark, is that big guy that's fighting in the plane scene, and he's having that boxing.
Really? That's the same guy. That's funny.
Same guy. And then in Last Crusade, he's the same one that's getting on the plane that's chasing, or not the plane, the blimp. Yeah, so.
That's cool. I like that little through line. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I love the fact that they keep bringing back the same actor for that whole thing. It was
I like
great.
to think he's just like a super nice guy named Chuck, big family man,
exactly,
or
right?
something like.
Yeah. So anyway, so he gets a stone. I'm not gonna get into much of it, but like he's like climbing up this bridge. Oh, that's another iconic scene where they're crossing this bridge, this huge rope bridge. And Indiana Jones cuts it in half. All the thuggy go flying down except for him and Mola Ram, and they're climbing up together. And Mola Ram's trying to ripping out Indy's heart, and he like stops it. And then basically, Indy says to him, like, you betrayed Sheba, and like the stones start to glow, and Mola Ram tries to grab him, and he falls off and falls to his doom, gets eaten by alligators. Indy saves the day, gets one stone. There's 3 of them. He gets one of them, brings it back to the village, and then Willie and him have a final kiss. And that's how it ends, right? And that's the end of Temple of Doom. So, I don't know.
Feels
overall,
like a direct. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say this ending feels like, and there's multiple scenes in this movie that feel like a direct homage in the later game series Uncharted. That's not officially associated, but you can see the clear through lines of like the Uncharted set in like Nepal, and then Elena and Drake have that moment. It's very similar.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay. See, here's the thing. I have not played much Uncharted, honestly.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know. I'm a huge Indiana Jones fan.
I think you'd get a kick out of them, honestly.
I watched the movie.
Well, that's not the. I mean, I thought the movie was
fine.
fun.
It's fun, yeah.
The games are some of my favorites, honestly, but
Okay.
the movie was like a fun popcorn,
Yeah.
But
yeah.
game's legitimately very good.
Okay.
First one's a little hard to go back to now.
Okay. Yeah.
That one, compared to all of Naughty Dog's other games, I would love a remaster of the first game.
Yeah. Yeah.
That'd be good. But
well, I mean, we'll talk about some Indiana Jones games too.
Sure. Yeah, sorry to jump the gun.
No,
bit,
I'm
literally.
just saying, like, they're pretty rough too to go back and play some of the early ones, So I mean, yeah, we'll get into that. I don't know. Overall, I would say like Temple of Doom, like, wasn't my favorite movie out of the trilogy. When it came out in the second one, I was like, oh, it's okay. It's not great.
It was just such a different vibe. Like, it was like, oh, this isn't quite. And then it felt like Last Crusade brought it back, but also injected just some kind of youthful energy of just like, yeah.
And I think there is something about the first one, and so we'll move into Raiders. So Raiders is the next movie in the series, chronological series. I think this takes place in 34, 35. I used to know these dates off the top of my head, like exactly. I know when Indiana Jones was born. He was born July 1st, 1899. That's
amazing.
His date of birth. So Indy, then this is the first movie we run into is Raiders of the Lost Ark. And in this movie, it opens up with that iconic scene. We talked a little bit about this already, where he's going to find this golden idol in this cave in South America. And he gets in the boulder, the whole, like, the scene with the boulder and everything is a very iconic scene. And he runs into Belloc, Rene Belloc, who is a French archaeologist who apparently him and Indy have a past that you don't know about. They do mention that in the Great Circle. There is some reference to Rene Belloc in the Great Circle. But apparently they both were students at one time that worked together, and there's a newspaper clipping in the Great Circle that talks a little bit about that. But yeah, so Renee takes the idol. And this is the first time that we run into a villain who is the through villain throughout the whole movie then too. He's in the opening scene. And then, I mean, obviously, Raiders is the first movie. But I mean, like, a lot of the other movies, you see the villain, like Lao Che was not the villain for the rest of the movie. In fact, I don't even know what happens to Lao Che.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
And then in Last Crusade,
you have, like, the main Nazi general guy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's in the beginning, but, like,
but he's, like, his presence is just kind of a thing, but you're not like constantly dealing with him. Yeah.
Yes. The only other one was the Dial of Destiny, and there is that character that he's in the beginning of the movie, and then he's through the whole movie too. So, but Rene Belloc is the villain through the whole movie, and so the government is concerned because the Nazis are looking for the lost Ark of the Covenant, and so they send off Indy to go find it, right? I guess what are some moments that stand out to you in this movie? We'll talk about like the first half where he like ends up going to meet Marion and then meets his friend Sala to find the lost Ark. Like, what are some moments that kind of stand out to you in that first half of the movie?
I think I always just think of the opening with this one immediately. Like, I can see it play out, and then seeing it kind of lovingly recreated with the Great Circle was very cool. Of like, it just sets the tone. Like we said, the whip noise, the moment where he's running out of the tomb area and the guy's like, throw me the idol. And they have that back and forth, and there's that double cross, like that kind of like, I don't trust everybody on this mission kind of vibe that kind of all encompasses this type of movie. But when I say it's like that's a thing going forward, but like Indiana Jones is what established these like narrative tropes and whatnot in a lot of ways for adventure movies. So it's interesting to see just like how many things were influenced by this. I love Miriam as a character. I think she's a great love interest, and once again is someone that can go toe to toe with Harrison Ford in a fun way and keep it very light and fun. And I think she brings a level of levity that, like, up until this point, like, serious Harrison Ford we kind of need in this one.
Yes.
Yeah, I think those are what stick out to me. So the first scene when she's like, I think she's playing poker, right,
She's
with
drinking.
the locals or the drinking game.
Yeah,
That's
the
right.
drinking game.
Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, so just seeing her like not causing trouble, but like making herself at home, I get, or you know what I mean, like being very friendly with folks. I think was fun.
Yeah. And she's tough. She is tough.
She's an independent woman, which I feel like in film at that time, especially, was like not always the thing, especially in like a male lead action film. Like she's not a damsel in distress, which I think is cool.
No. Yeah, she can hold her own. So a couple things. One, did you know that Tom Selleck was supposed to play the part of Indiana Jones? George Lucas wanted Tom Selleck to play Indiana Jones. His commitment to Magnum PI prevented him from doing the movie. Although recently I read he's like, I could have done both, but apparently that was part of the issue. And then they went to Harrison Ford.
Interesting.
Which I'm glad they went with Harrison Ford. I can't imagine Tom Selleck being Indiana Jones.
I think he's a fine actor. I don't have like issue with him, but I like it's hard to look at like 40 plus years later and be like, it could have been a different guy. It's like, no, it couldn't have. It shouldn't have. Yeah,
it shouldn't have.
They cast correctly.
Yeah, they did.
That's wild though.
Isn't that crazy? I
love
that
those like
moment.
I love I'm a sucker for this person auditioned for this and that, or this person could have been, you know, I always find that really the alternate history.
Yes. An alternate reality. Tom Selleck is Indiana Jones.
And Harrison Ford is Magnum.
Apparently that, I mean, I'm glad we got our timeline.
Yeah, I
the
think
sacred
it's good.
timeline.
The sacred timeline.
Another thing, I'm going to mention this here. It doesn't get a lot of talking about, and I don't know, maybe it shouldn't. But I wonder if Indiana Jones would be canceled today, because you get the sense of, well, not just get the sense. So Indy's like 10 years older than Marion. And when they met, so she's the daughter of Abner, which was his professor at Ravenwood. And he's like 26. She's like 16. And
he's 20?
Yeah. I did the math at one point. Yeah, he's like 26 and she's like 16 when they like first meet. And yeah, probably
that's icky. Don't like that.
That's not
Don't
great,
like that.
right?
I take back the love interest comment. That's not good.
And they kind of mentioned it because she was like, I was in love. And he's like, you would know her. She was like, I was young. I was stupid. I was in love. And he's like, you know what you were doing. And I'm like, well, she was pretty young though, Indy. Like she was pretty young.
When we see them in Raiders, that's not the first time they've met, right?
No. So it's been 10 years since he's seen her. And so
that would, got it.
So I'm pretty sure
you're saying he was 26 in the
back then.
Before meeting.
Before.
Okay, I'm tracking. I was like, wait,
Sorry.
that doesn't.
No.
In
Raiders,
you're all good. I was doing secondary math in my head, and I was like, wait a second. No, that makes so much more sense. Okay, got it.
No, in Raiders, he's like 30, mid-30s.
Still
and
icky, though. Still for sure icky.
Yeah.
Indiana Jones, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Come on.
I mean, she may have been 17, but she was.
No,
she was not. Yeah, she was. But you know, the Beatles saying she was just 17. I don't know. Maybe no. Just kidding. That was. They were talking about Indiana Jones. So that's kind of weird. Looking back, and I was like, okay, Indy, like that was weird. But
I think it's one of those things where, like, if Indiana Jones hadn't come out when it did. And in 2025, we were like, Joe Schmo and the Hidden Treasure, or what, let's just alternate reality this.
Yeah.
I think it would have to be a different movie in some aspects. Like, I think you could have a lighthearted adventure. You could have the tone, but to your point, like with Temple of Doom and cultural representation, with like, they would have to like approach it differently.
Yes. It's interesting how, I don't know if he would be seen in the same light. So, I mean, we spent a lot of time on Temple of Doom. I feel like we won't spend as much time on all these other movies, but he'd end up finding the Ark of the Covenant, right? And it gets stolen by the Nazis. And then he follows the Nazis to this remote island where they're going to open up the Ark, do a religious ceremony to open up the Ark. Indy then, rightfully remembers, don't look at the face of God because your face will melt if you look at the face of God. And we saw that happen to the Nazis. Their faces melted. That was the scariest moment. I was like 5 or 6 when this movie came out. 5 years old when this movie came out. And watching this face melt scared the hell out of me. my kids have seen this movie and they're like, that's not scary, Dad. I don't know why you think that's scary, but that was really scary for me. That was a traumatic moment for me to watch that face melt. It looks fake now, but it was scary.
It was definitely scary. I think part of the special effects thing, they can like suspend disbelief. I will say, I feel like this motivated me of like, I need to be educated because he knows to look away. Like he's prepared for this. So that was kind of a funny thing in hindsight. If I was like you said, it was like it made being smart like a cool power, like an important thing, which I think is neat.
Yeah. So I will say this: like Indiana Jones was very formidable in my upbringing. It was because of Raiders of the Lost Ark that I was like, Mom, Dad, read me stories from the Bible. I want to learn about the Ark because maybe one day I will have to know what to do. Right. So like. I was really into studying religion, and I just mentioned this here. Like I went to school for religious studies in anthropology and archaeology and history. I wanted to be Indiana Jones, right? So not all the weird stuff with Indy. I mean, not that stuff. Just all the cool stuff with Indy.
You wanted to go on adventures.
Yeah, I wanted to go on adventures.
Uncover history. Yeah. No, I'm following.
That is not archaeology. I just want to say that is not archaeology. But it was fun. It was neat. Indiana Jones was a really formidable, like that character like was somebody I looked up to, and like I said before, being smart is sexy, right? And he's the first one that made that case. So really loved Indiana Jones. So that's Raiders, and then we go into Last Crusade, which is like you and I favorite movie.
So good.
This one opens up with a young Indiana Jones, and he's going after the Cross of Coronado. It's stolen a bunch of grave robbers, one of them looking kind of like Indiana Jones. He has a fedora and a jacket like Indy, and you get the sense that maybe that's where he got his idea of wearing a jacket and a fedora from this guy. He does mention in that, right? He gets the cross and he's like, it belongs in a museum. So you get the sense of like, oh, okay, Indiana Jones has this sense of like things belong in a museum.
I'm a sucker for little fan service with few exceptions. I love a little, like that's where the came from, that item, that line, that it's fun. Some people are like hate on it, but haters gonna hate. I think it's fun.
Yeah. There's a moment too where he runs by in the beginning of the movie. He runs by his dog, and you find out the significance of the dog later in the movie. And then the second part of the opening part is where he's an adult now and going after the Cross of Coronado from that same guy, and he gets it. I don't know how he gets off. He like jumps off into the ocean. I don't know who saves him. Like he's in the middle of the ocean. I don't know.
There's some leaps of logic there that are like, I'm not quite sure either.
But then he's sent on this quest by Donovan, who is this like basically this rich guy who is looking for the cup of Christ, the Holy Grail. It turns out Indy's dad was always looking for the Holy Grail as well, and he sent his dad. His dad gets captured. He needs to go save his dad, and this is where he runs into Elsa, who is an archaeologist from Austria, and this is you're like, oh, this character, she's like his equal, right? Marion like was his equal in regards to their roughness, right? Like their rough and toughness,
the charisma,
like, charisma, right? But from a intelligence side, from like not that she wasn't smart, because she was very, very smart, but what his academic side, I should say, this is where this is his equal on the academic world of archaeology, right? Because she's an archaeologist, he's an archaeologist. This is a match made in heaven. And it turns out she's a bad guy. And not only is she a bad guy, she slept with Dee's dad.
There's so many layers, the twists and turns, but you're along for the ride. You're like, oh my God, I have to know what happens. With this one, I always think of the scene where they're in disguises and the book burning. That whole sequence always really stands out to me with this one. Of they really make you hate the Nazis, and like Indiana Jones as a whole does that in spades, but this movie in particular, in that scene, is just like, oh my God, the book burning, like it gets you.
And there's the line where he says, Nazis, I hate these guys. Like of course, we
me
do
too, Indy.
Little does he know he says it to a Nazi, although I mean she is a Nazi she's not. She says she's not, but she's a Nazi. She's a bad guy. And so a little side thing about this. So the actress that played her, she was like in her 20s, and Harrison Ford was in his 50s, and I was like, okay, again, or it kind of, yeah, it was a little.
It's
a little
still
weird.
icky.
Yeah, it's still icky. It's still icky. It's still not.
I guess the two takeaway lines from this movie are: smart is sexy, and it's still a bit icky. The dichotomy of Indiana Jones.
Right, that's right. So the whole movie is about them finding the Holy Grail, but really it's about finding the relationship between the father and the son. And his father is like, "You call this archaeology?" And I just love that. Or he's like, "You think they're trying to kill us?" "I know, Dad." He says, "This is a new experience for me. This happens to me all the time." I love that. And I've said this before, where Indy, is so cocky and so brash up to every other, like, he's just like oozes like manliness. And then he runs into his dad and he's like a kid, he turns into a kid again. And, yeah, so I don't know. I guess what are some of your favorite moments in this movie?
So we touched on the disguises, book burning.
Yeah. He runs into the Hitler in that scene too, by the way.
Scene where Harrison Ford and Sean Connery are riding on the motorcycle with the sidecar.
Yeah, that's a good.
Always cracks me up, and the banter there is really good. The ending sequence when they find the Holy Grail and the Nazi like picks the shiny cup and then dies,
he drinks it,
and like that whole sequence.
He
and
chose
then
his poorly.
Once the room starts shaking and all the things, and they got to get out, like that whole moment is really cool. And I love the opening too, like we mentioned with the young Harrison. There's so many properties that have now done the first 10 minutes is the young character into that, and this was like, but this did it first, and it was like, wow, that's crazy, he's a kid. I found it amusing that, jumping back to the beginning for 1 second with that he was an Eagle Scout or a Cub Scout, right? That was his whole thing. So it was like that's interesting too, that he like was interested at a young age in certain things.
He was 13 in that scene.
Really? And he's
13
like
or
riding
14.
a horse and jumping around doing all this stuff?
Yes! 13, 14 years old in that scene. And I was like, I turned to my 13-year-old and I'm like, "Can you see yourself doing that?" And she's like, "No." Like, that whole
if
scene
I
was...
gave you a horse, can you do the rest? Your child will be the first ever that's like, "I don't want a horse for my birthday. Dad,
Yeah, that's
please,
right.
No.
Yeah, please no. I know what comes along with a horse. It means that I have to go on adventures, and I'm not interested in that. So for me, my favorite moment. There's a lot of really good moments in this movie, but my favorite moment is right at the end, where Sean Connery, his dad, says, they're asking, "What did you find?" Right? "What did you find on this adventure?" And his dad says, "Illumination." And he says, "And what did you find, Junior?" And he's like, "Dad, I told you, I don't like that." And then Salah, his friend, says, "Well, what is this Junior you keep saying?" And his dad says, "Well, that's his name, Henry Jones Jr." And he says, "I like the name Indiana." And he's like, "We named the dog Indiana." And Salah's like, just thinks that's the funniest thing. "You were named after a dog?" And he just starts laughing and laughing and laughing
It's so
and
good.
laughing. It's so good. But there's a moment where, he keeps calling him Junior. And there's a moment where Elsa, right at the end of the movie, Elsa's hanging from a cliff and she's about to, they're told not to leave the temple with the Holy Grail, not to cross the seal. They do. And when they do, the temple starts falling apart. And Elsa slips and falls. And she's hanging there, and Indiana Jones is holding her hand, trying to help her up. And she's with one hand trying to grab the Grail, and she almost has it. And Indy's like, "You got to give me your other hand, Elsa. You're going to fall." And she falls to her doom in this like pit, which I'm assuming is a bottomless pit. We don't know. Maybe it's just only 3 feet, and she stands up and she's like,
It's a
"I'm
big
fine."
Grail at the bottom. It's really cushy. Memory foam.
That's right. We don't know.
Play place vibes. It's just.
Then the scene happens where Indy's falling, and his dad grabs his hand, and he's like trying to grab the Grail, and he says, "Indiana, let it go." Right. So he calls him by his name that he prefers to be called. Such a great moment, such a great scene. I really loved that moment, and yeah, it's a really good movie. Then you have Crystal Skull. I'm not going to go into too much of Crystal Skull. Like, we can talk a little bit about it, but Crystal Skull.
That's okay.
Was not my favorite movie.
The one thing I'll say with Crystal Skull is that was the first Indiana Jones film I was ever able to see in theaters.
Oh, okay.
Just once again, I'm aging myself the other way.
Yeah. Because I was like in 89.
I was like 2000.
I was like 13, 14 years old.
2008?
2008, I think
I was in like middle school.
Yeah. See, I was in middle school with Last Crusade, so yeah.
Gotcha. But yeah, not a great movie, but I still had fun. Like, it still is a fun adventure. Hearing the music in a theater, I think really like lit a fire in me, so that was exciting. And I do think the opening sequence is pretty cool. Like the refrigerator thing, I think that feels something I think we'll get into with the games, is that I think Indiana Jones is inherently goofy, and that isn't always evident. But I think opening scenes like that, I think, are really, really fun. But the quicksand scene's weird. The turn to aliens is weird. I wanted to like Shia LaBeouf because I like Shia LaBeouf, but like the way his story's handled is odd, and Miriam and stuff. It's a messy movie.
Yeah.
I haven't watched it since like high school, so it's been a bit.
So this takes place in the late 50s. So Indy's older. There are no Nazis. Nazis are gone. Now it's the Soviets. And I get what Lord George Lucas was trying to do here in this movie, right? So he's trying to capture what was popular in those eras. So in the 90s and 60s, late 50s, it was about aliens, right? There was a lot of radio shows and stuff like that about aliens. And so he's trying to capture that. I get what he's trying to do. He's trying to capture into like what was popular during the 50s. Aliens, therefore Indiana Jones runs into aliens. It just doesn't translate as well in the movie. What was really interesting, when this movie came out, they did an interview with Lucas and Spielberg. And this is right after Lucas did Phantom Menace and the first three movies, right? And they didn't go over very well. Like, they're not as popular.
He likes a prequel in hindsight. Yeah, he's a big prequel guy.
He is. And the question that one of the interviewers asked, I think it was in Rolling Stone, they asked, like, what are you concerned? So they were asking both of them, are you concerned that the audience won't like this movie? And Lucas said, that never concerns me. I'm not concerned what the audience thinks. And Spielberg said, well, I do. Like, it is important for me. And there are moments in this movie that I really like the fact that they reference the other thing we didn't really talk about, and we won't get into too much of it, but there's, after The Last Crusade, Spielberg was an executive producer, and I think Lucas had a hand in this as well, of the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. There's a TV series that happened for one season, and it chronicled the young Indiana Jones adventures. And we know that this is canon because Indiana Jones in this movie talks about how he rode with Pancho Villa. He mentions that to he doesn't know at this time, but his son. But the one thing that's not canon in that is that each episode of that show opened up with a really old Indiana Jones, and he was like reminiscing about one of his adventures. And in one of those episodes, he has a daughter and he has grandkids.
Wow, that's funny.
They don't ever talk about that anymore. Like that's gone. They don't mention that anymore. So yeah, it's really fascinating.
This is jumping ahead, but is Mutt, his son, mentioned in Dial of Destiny? Like his existence?
Yeah.
He is? Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So they at least future-proofed there, but they weren't quite doing it with
Yes. So in Crystal Skull, so his son is Mutt, which is interesting because, Indiana Jones is named after his dog, and then you got his son Mutt, which I was like, was kind of interesting. He's kind of a greaser. He's a dropout. He's not into school and stuff like that. And Indy, when he finds out, so he meets Marion. Marion says, "Hey, this is my son. It's actually your son." And then the moment he finds out, he kind of gets hard on his son. He instantly latches onto his son. And I think part of it is he's trying to build that relationship that he never had with his dad. I think that's what they're trying to tap into. And there's moments where he says, "This is intolerable." Well, that's what his dad would always say. I think that was a fun throwback to his dad. Like, all of a sudden he starts talking like his dad.
You can't run away from it to some extent.
Yes. So, and at the end of the movie, I'm not going to talk about I honestly, this movie is so weird. I don't really know what's happening. They find the skull. It's an alien skull.
I don't know if they did either. I think they were trying to find it while they were making it.
I think so too.
I wouldn't go so far to say as it's like, I know some folks who are like, it's garbage. It's not good, it's fine.
It's fine.
at best, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, it's just, I don't know.
There's an alien
I still
spaceship
have a
at the
laugh.
end,
I
I
still
think.
eat some popcorn. Yeah, I'm still
Yeah.
just like, that's absurd. Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's the most absurd Indiana Jones movie for sure.
It's easily the worst one by a
100%.
country mile.
100%.
And then there's the other 4.
Yeah.
Yes.
The other 4. Yes. Yeah, and at the end, he ends up marrying the love of his life.
I like that part. That felt nice.
Too. That actually was my I was really touched by that, right? And then the hat rolls by, and his son picks it up, and Indy grabs it and puts it on his head and walks out. And you're like, okay. In the last Crusade, they ride off to the sunset. That's the last scene. Nope. Okay, this is the last scene. Indy puts his hat on. They walk off. No. Then we get Dial of Destiny, the latest movie that came out last year. Do you like Dial of Destiny? Have you seen Dial of Destiny, first of all?
I have seen Dial of Destiny.
Okay.
I did like it. I think
too.
I don't love it as much as the original trilogy, but I think inherently there's just like a childhood nostalgia and reverence that I'll have for those original films. But I had a fun time. I thought it did some interesting things. I thought it played with historical time periods in an interesting way. I thought the big like MacGuffin at the end with time travel was actually really cool. Like if we're gonna do something supernatural, I thought that was a cool version of that. And I thought Phoebe Walker-Bridges did a nice job, and they had
I thought she was great.
Some nice chemistry. So I generally thought it was a nice return to form, and it felt like a fitting end after Crystal Skull was a bit rough. This was like, oh, okay, cool. Nice to kind of put a bow on it, let Harrison Ford go out on, I think, a good note. I know it didn't do like crazy well at the box office, and I don't think it's a perfect movie by any means, but I walked out being like, I had fun with that movie. I enjoyed myself, and I'm not sitting here like nitpicking it to death. It was just like a fun experience.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it showed Indiana Jones as a man who is kind of out of his element, right? Like in every movie where he's being a professor, except for maybe the Crystal Skull, but in the other 2 movies, in Last Crusade and Raiders, all the girls are kind of fawning over him, right? And in this movie, they could care less about archaeology. He can't keep their attention. They're all about, putting a man on the moon, right? And I get it, right? They're looking forward to the future, and he's kind of finding himself a man out of place in this new world. You asked about his son. Was his son mentioned? His son died in Vietnam. So this is the reason that him and Marion are actually separated.
Right.
Because she's really upset about this, right? And he doesn't know how to comfort her. And this is actually like really an interesting moment, I think. So Indiana Jones, when he gets late teens, early 20s or so, he leaves home to go fight in World War I. Like he goes and fights. You learn this through the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, like the TV series. And he leaves home. And then in Last Crusade, his dad says, you left right when you're getting interesting. And he left home because him and his dad didn't get along. And he's just like, I got to get out of here. So he joins the army and he goes fights in World War I. His son left to go fight in Vietnam because they didn't get along. And he did it to basically snub his dad. And he dies. And I think Indy feels really awful about that. And, the Vietnam War was an awful war. Like, so I think there's a lot of emotions that you don't see a lot in Indiana Jones, right? Like really a different side of Indy that you haven't seen before. And that's why, so the premise is that there's this dial of destiny that can basically turn back time, and a Nazi from the old Nazis. It's trying to go back in time and bring back the Nazis. And they end up going to the wrong time. They actually end up going back to ancient Rome in times, right? And Indy's like, just leave me here, because like this is where I belong, right? Because I don't belong back. I don't have a place. The love of his life is gone. He doesn't have a place, and he feels like this is his own place. Obviously, his goddaughter, his goddaughter, like brings him back. And I will say I cried at the last scene.
I did too.
Did you? Yeah. When Marion, Marion's there, and he was just like, I didn't know how to help you. And she's like, I was hurting everywhere. And he said, well, where doesn't it hurt? And that's obviously a direct callback to the first movie where he's hurting everywhere. And she's like, well, where doesn't it hurt? And, and she points at her elbow here and he kisses it. And then she points at another and she points at her forehead and then her lips and they kiss. And it's a really touching moment. Yeah. Like I'm kind of getting a little choked up just talking about it right now. And they're just fictional characters, but I really love that.
Well, it's a decade running franchise. And it just, I think after Crystal Skull, it was just one of those where it was just like, we didn't have true, like satisfying closure. And so just Dial of Destiny being a nice, well written movie that ended on a positive place and allowed the characters to be vulnerable. Like I think it's a powerful film, and I think it gets a bad rap. Like I think people are unnecessarily harsh to that movie.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
That's my 2 cents.
No, I agree. I think this is a lot better movie than a lot of people give it credit for. Ironically, Crystal Skull is the highest grossing movie, but I think a lot of people were like really excited when Indiana Jones came back.
The novelty of just it being in theaters and like everybody's taking their kids. Yeah.
And then it was like, oh, that's not really what we wanted. I actually really like Dial of Destiny. I would say it's like probably Last Crusade, Raiders, and then Dial of Destiny, and then Temple of Doom, and then Crystal Skull for me.
I think same.
Yeah.
Maybe if I did a rewatch of Temple of Doom, I'd like it more, but I think that feels right, that ranking.
Yeah. Okay, so that concludes part 1 of the series. So part 2 will release next week. And then Luke and I are still working on the Great Circle, so eventually we'll get together and talk about that game as well. But until then, everyone stay safe and game on. Bye.